Welcome to a very exciting episode today. I am joined by three staffers from Steamforged Games. We're going to be talking about their new 3D printing releases and some lore and some spoilers, all revolving around Infernals, Grimkin, and Convergence. My name's Ryan. I used to be good at Warmachine. Welcome to Spell Rack. I'm very excited to be joined by an elaborate panel of SFG staffers today. We're going to be able to cover kind of soup to nuts the announcement that was made on Monday of last week about new printings for Infernals, Convergence, and Grimkin, plus a lot of other stuff that we can get into. So I know everybody knows you guys, but Matt, why don't we start with you? Give a little introduction and then we'll get started.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, well, I'm Matt. I am part of the SFG team looking after Warmachine. My day job is, what is my day job? Creative director. Let's go with that. So I get to dream up cool ideas and hope desperately that the wonderful people in the design and dev team are able to interpret those crazy ideas and turn them into a reality.
Love it. Jamie?
Sure. My name's Jamie Perkins. I work on the mostly the gameplay side of Warmachine development. I'm very much at the coalface of brand new models that are going into game development, looking after playtesting and monitoring day-to-day changes and trying to talk with the community as much as I can.
Surprised you didn't use your full name, Jamie.
We don't use that title very often, Matt.
What? I was going to go with the Jamie Perkins.
Matt, how do you feel about having the greatest player in Warmachine as your game designer?
It's wonderfully freeing and liberating, because what it does is it creates a weird internal challenge for me. Is what is the craziest, wildest stuff I can come up with, and Jamie can still help land it on the runway. So, you know, okay. I like to test the outer boundaries of what's possible. So no, it's brilliant. It really is. Yeah. It is brilliant. And I think we've got a secret weapon in the dev team as well. A certain Scottish chap called Fraser, who I think is our secret end of level boss.
Okay.
Yeah, I think he's
actually
really
on with Fedridge.
He's really, really good. Yeah, look, we've got some fantastic talent in the team, and it really helps make sure that we're looking at everything we do from multiple different lenses. So from that really competitive viewpoint, all the way through to, like, you know, that sort of super casual, much more sort of story forward style player as well. So we've built a really strong dev team that gives us broad coverage.
Yeah, I love it. And then Sherwin, you have more love for this game, I would say, than everybody else with where your position is. So what's your background?
Yeah, I'm Sherwin Matthews, and I guess we normally describe me as the lore master, right? Which sadly isn't my exact job title with the company, but Matt, we really should make it that, because that's a cool job title.
Could do. It always makes me think of Ghostbusters when I hear that you referred to as the lore master.
I mean,
the key master.
Yeah. Yeah, I could go with that. Yeah. There is no Sherwin, only Zool. Yeah, I'll start screaming that in meetings. That's probably a bad thing.
I was going to say, I describe you as like, I feel like you're the heart of the Iron Kingdoms, being the lore master, right? Like the depth and love that you have to have for this game to do your job, I think is really, really cool. I think any of us that play this game love the setting and the story, and you being the kind of the beating heart of that is awesome.
Thank you. I stand on the shoulders of giants. Like, there's been so many people before me with regards to, like, Doug, for example, Matt Getz, and some of the others. I live in a really weird space. Like 12 a.m. last night, I found myself chatting to Matt about the Giants of Bamoth, for example, and typing up a very, very long message to him via WhatsApp about how dragons work. And it'll never go away. It just keeps going, and it's a cool world to exist in and just have all that lore. I'm mildly concerned I've forgotten a whole bunch of stuff I should really remember about real life, but I'll just live in the Iron Kingdoms. It's fun.
It's better over there. Trust me. Or at least this is me coming from
Sure,
the
let's go with that.
Stay in fantasy.
Feels
Stay
like it lately, doesn't it?
Yeah, I know, yeah. All right, well, to get us kicked off, Matt, you guys had a really big announcement on Monday. You announced the 3D printing of 3 factions, existing factions, and your new Frontier. So tell us about that campaign you guys are starting.
Well, let me give you the high level view, but this is an initiative that Jamie's driving along, so he'll be able to give you a huge amount more detail. But for me, I think that the thing that I want to talk about and share is how important the 3D platform is to us going forward. And I think, regardless of how you may or may not feel about it from a company or corporate perspective, and we know that there are games companies out there who are quite resistant to it, and there are others that clearly don't really know what to do with it. I don't think it's going away. I think it's going to become more and more ubiquitous amongst the gamers. So Steamforge is absolutely looking to embrace it as a platform going forward. And this new frontier is, I hope, a really big statement of intent as to how important this channel is for the growth of Warmachine and lowering those barriers of entry. Because right now we want people like you who used to play Warmachine to come back, try it. And there needs to be no reason for you to not try it, because guess what? The second you try it, all of that muscle memory will come back and you'll be just going, it's like finding a old pair of trainers or sneakers in the back of your cupboard that you've forgotten about, but you put them on. Oh, they feel amazing. Like, well, how did I forget about these sneakers? So it's the same thing. So yeah, Frontier campaign, really excited to bring 3 new armies and show them off on in the digital space and make some very, very visually distinct and interesting armies accessible to the people to get in, print an army, start playing the game, hopefully via Journeyman.
Love it.
So if I could just dovetail off of that, this actually also represents the fulfilling of a promise that we made at Adepticon 25, which was, we mentioned, these are 3 of the armies that we mentioned as part of the keynote there that we wanted to make sure that we brought back in a similar way to how we have done with Dark Operations and Crucible Guard since then as well. And this just means that we can make sure that we deliver and make good on that promise. We, like, as Matt said many times before, we want to tell you what we're going to do it, and then tell you what we've done. And we want to build that, continue to build that trust and faith with the community of things that we're delivering on for this game.
But
in terms of,
how dare you forget them?
And some that we didn't promise. I don't think we promised Thornfall. They technically are a bonus. So
on top of what don't worry, Jeremy's going to start shifting over to Gators at some point in time. Banging that drum, isn't he? So,
once too many people are playing Pharaoh. Once too many people are playing Pharaoh and they're not cool enough for him anymore, perhaps.
Exactly. Yeah. No, not edgy enough.
Absolutely. But yeah, so bringing armies back like this through the digital platform, as Matt was talking about, is it does quite a lot of things for us. It gives the players access to armies that are actually have a degree of scarcity to them as well. The last few years, it's not always been the easiest to get hold of an Infernals army or a Grimkin army, and certain models within the Convergence as well can be quite difficult to get hold of for a lot of players. So being able to have access to those, quite widely is a great thing, because they're really flavorful armies, very impactful in the game, on the table as well, and very vibrant in terms of a lot of theme that's going on there. They give a really easy access to brand new and returning players. You can get hold of an army and print it yourself, and more options to do that, just to get into the game, or for players who remember these armies, remember playing against them, to go, I can do that now, and I can get into that. I have 3D printing as a hobby. I can print this army out for myself and go and get involved in Warmachine again. So it's a great way to get back into the hobby as well. If you people on the fence thinking about it, there's just more and more reasons all the time to come and get back in on Warmachine.
I can tell you, like, my personal story with my local play group here in Dallas is one of our players, he played Crix, back Mark II, Mark III, got back into the game, and he had always liked the Cephalix models. And obviously that was the first step on the printing block. And now he owns an entire Cephalix army. It's beautiful. Right. He's a good painter. I've shown it off on the show, and it's lovely to have him. He kind of plays some of the old Crick still, but now he also has a Mark IV presence in his Dark Operations. And then another friend of mine, he just got a 3D printer so that he could start printing Warmachine. And voila, out of nowhere, it seems like it took him 2 weeks. He has an entire Crucible Guard army.
Amazing.
I mean, like, Colossals, 2 battle engines, he got everything. And I'm thinking, like, can you even print that fast? Like, in 2 weeks to get a whole army? But he did it.
I mean,
I know. And now he's getting them painted up, and he's been super pumped about that because he loves the models and the idea behind Crucible Guard. So I see it in my own backyard, right? It's been a lot of fun. It's very cool. And as a player, I appreciate you guys doing that. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about Infernals and Grimkin. We'll start with Infernals. So Sherwin, I took a break from the game for like 7 or 8 years, right? I stopped in like 2017. And I don't know what years Infernals were released, but it was while I was away. And so I only ever saw them from a distance. I would go to Gen Con here in the States, and I'd go say hi to Travis Marge over at the Warmachine tables. And I'd look down at the table and I'd be like, what is that? And the casters are beautiful, but I didn't know what any of the stuff was. So if you had to educate somebody that's been away for a little while, can you give me a little lore update on what Infernals are and maybe where they are?
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge question. I like chatting about this stuff, but there's so many points they can intersect into this. But they're kind of one of the big bads that's always existed in the Warmachine universe, but not ostensibly so. They're these, the best way we would think of them is they are demons who exist beyond Cain and Urcain. They kind of exist in this, beyond the outer abyss, in this sort of shadowy realm of darkness there nothing is truly tangible. They're able to come in. I mean, there's a couple of different ways they interact with the actual setting. The first one is through the Orgoth, or most famously, and they're the reason why the Orgoth are able to have the powers they do and so on. And that's why the Orgoth sacrifice untold amounts of souls to them to feed their masters. The second order, because that's one of the orders, the Felgoth. The other one is the Non-Acreon order. And that order is more subtle. They're the way, and this is really where the Infernals, as we would call them, come in. And they made a pact with Thamar, one of the human gods in this setting. And effectively, this was around rejecting or around fighting back against the Orgoth in the first invasion. And the part of that pact was, sure, we'll give humans the power of magic. At some point in the future, we're just going to casually come for 2/3 of all human souls on the planet, which is quite an extreme thing to do, but Thamar at the time makes this pact with the Infernals, understanding, well, look, if we put it centuries in advance, then I have plenty of ways for us to get out of this in the meantime, which of course kind of happens. So we skip forward, obviously, several centuries, and we find ourselves now at sort of roughly that time era you're talking about, so towards the end of the Mark II, Mark III kind of era, what we had. And basically, the claiming effects, it comes into being. This is where the date has come. The Infernals of the Non-Acreon Order have arrived in Cain, and they do so through various different gates that are set up by cultists that they've influenced over the years, and they land on Cain to ostensibly get 2/3 of human souls. And of course, while they're there, demons are all sorts of good things, like they will just go above and beyond. They're high performers. They're going to go out and get as many souls as they want, and that doesn't just limit to humans. That's Scorn, that's elves, that's dwarves, although that doesn't go very well, but we won't talk about that part. And also they even make inroads to kind of Zoo and the other continents as well. It's not just Western Immoran that feels the impact of this. But that's really where the Infernals land. And these creatures, the masters are the leaders of this order. And they're these incredibly powerful beings that are able to split souls like an atom, and out of that comes horrors. And those are some of the models you were talking about earlier. And their armies are filled with cultists, horrors that have just sort of crawled into being that shouldn't really ever exist. They're kind of these things that are created in an instant out of the raw unleashing of power that comes out of splitting souls.
It feels a little bit, to apply a very modern framework to it, it feels like the Upside Down in Stranger Things, right? You have all these crazy demons, and then, so what I'm hearing from you is there are cultists on the, the regular side up that are summoning these beings or allowing them to transfer from their prior dimension to ours. Okay, that very, very helpful. Because I knew they were the big bads, and then all of a sudden they showed up, but I didn't understand that. I mean, they had been foreshadowed multiple thousands of years ago. They're coming.
Yeah, exactly that. And as said, they've always been present, because they've always been the driver behind the Orgoth as well as this. And it's one of the key reasons why we have warjacks in the setting, is because without the Infernals, there's no magic, there's no warjacks. So it's all kind of tied together. But very cool.
Okay, with that background on the Infernals, I know the Grimkin was also another army that was released while I was away. And obviously, their lore and setting is a little bit different. The models are different looking from the range that you would normally see. And I wasn't quite sure where the Grimkin came from. So on a lore aspect, can you help me to understand the Grimkin?
Yeah, totally, because they are extremely unique. They're so very different to all the other factions. So to do this, we have to go way back when, unsurprisingly, much like the Infernals. And that's when humans in the setting first start worshipping Menoth. Menoth kind of goes off to go hunt the Devourer Worm and leaves the humans to their own devices for a short time. When Menoth returns, gives the humans 4 gifts, which I won't necessarily get into. But some of these humans actually grow quite resentful of Menoth while he's away, and actually when the gifts are given, see them as really a way of restricting them, of actually controlling them rather than anything else. And these individuals become known as the Defiers, and they're punished by Menoth, and they're hurled into the void as banished, effectively. These are, they are the warlocks of the faction for people. So that is the King of Nothing, the Dreamer, so on, the Child. They're those characters. And they spend centuries in this void. And in that time, they go utterly, utterly insane. They are tormented by all the creatures that lurk in the void. The void is not a very nice place to be at all. But slowly, over time, also build power, because they learn to survive in this place. No living creature is ever sent to the void. Being sent so is a very bad place to be. But they do gain power over time as they just become even more corrupt and effectively just really these sort of ruinous creatures. And one of the things they start to be able to do is influence the world, or the sort of Cain. They start to speak to people in dreams and memories and that sort of stuff. And that starts to form fairy tales and legends of first themselves, but then also other things around that. And that builds this idea of these Grimkin, i.e. the fairy tales that are sort of the sinister fairy tales that, you could draw from that how mothers would tell children, these fairy tales to get them to go to bed or whatever else, or their boogeymen, all of the sort of stuff that people can easily imagine. But they start to actually gain tangible power as a result of this. And when they eventually die and they pass into Cain or to the void, because obviously no god follows these individuals who've abandoned their gods, they kind of get drawn together as the Grimkin followers of the Defiers. Skip forward a whole bunch of time and we get back to the Infernals again and the Old Witch of Kador. She's a obviously reoccurring celebrity in our setting. And she is obviously this all-knowing being who knows that the claiming is coming that I talked about. And she knows that this is something where this is going to come upon the Iron Kingdoms. And she has some machinations in play. She has Old Umbry, which she's building up, although that's not ready yet. So one of the things that she looks to do instead is to make contact with the Defiers and actually invite them back to Cain. Because with that in mind, they can try to attack and kill some of the high-placed cultists who would be responsible for bringing in the Infernal Masters. And this process would be called the Wicked Harvest, because the Defiers are very, very resentful of being cast out by Menoth, and they want to come back for revenge. The downside of this is that they're not going to stop just with the bad guys. They're going to pretty much just get everybody, right? But that's collateral damage as far as the Old Witch is concerned. That's something where... Yeah, these are things that will happen. But hey, if we get if 20% of the people that get killed by the Grimkin are kind of, are infernal cultists and high ranked ones, then that's good with me. So fair enough. And that's pretty much what happens. So the Old Witch is the one who actually pierces reality and be able to bring them back into the world. And the Wicked Harvest begins basically. And that, in our setting, is successful. It does force the Infernals to come back a bit earlier than what they would, which is ultimately contributes to one of the reasons as to why the Infernals don't simply destroy the entire face of the Iron Kingdoms, because she acted early. Now, of course...
So you're saying the Old Witch is a hero then, basically?
I mean, the Old Witch is always a hero. Well, if you're Cadoran like Jamie, then she's always been a hero, right? She's a national icon. Your mileage may vary depending on what faction you play.
Fair. Okay. And again, right, for somebody that's been away, it's so helpful to hear that both of these factions have really strong, deep ties inside of the world, and they're so fundamental to what Warmachine is. The factions might look a little different because they come from the Upside Down or the Void. They're as much a part of the world as anything else. Jamie, both of these factions have unique mechanics and unique designs. I know you weren't there when these were initially designed, but I do struggle a little bit as there's Warmachine, right? There's so many rules, there's so many models. If you want to go play at a high level, you need to know your opponent's stuff as well as you do yours. And I struggle with Infernals and Grimkin just because it's a lot of new models and then it's new mechanics. So I don't need you to do a super deep dive, but a very brief overview of kind of how you saw the factions as they were initially designed with their separate mechanics. Maybe Infernals first.
Yeah, no problem. So Infernals are very much like attrition as a concept brought forward into an army. They do that from a sort of visual perspective of demons being summoned to the table, and they're adding additional forces to the table, where most armies that lose models are able to regenerate losses, so you can have recursion through Grim Salvation, etc. Similar kinds of rules, Grim Returns rather. But Infernals are one of the few armies that can add brand new additional models to the table, and not only they're doing this through, or mainly not even doing this through units, they're doing this through the cohorts in terms of their horrors or their equivalents of their Warbeasts and Warjacks. So if you're assuming you're playing, it changes on the point size, but assuming you're playing a standard 100-point game, over the course of the game, an Infernal Master can add an additional horror once per turn by spending a number of their essence points. It's their equivalent of Focus and Fury, by literally bringing a brand new horror to the table. It doesn't cost them any extra points, so they actually start the game with 100 points, so they'll finish the game with somewhere around 130 to 139 points worth of models on the table. Because they're adding these extra horrors. And they can only do it once per turn, so by turn 3, sometimes turn 4 if they've needed to wait a turn, they'll have all of the horrors on the table. So you might start with a battle group of, say, your Infernal Master and then, a Colossal and 3 Tormentors. If you're playing Obadamos, for example, you could finish the game. If they don't destroy any of those horrors, you're going to finish the game with your Colossal and 6 heavy horrors on the table as well. So you're just there's an element of like burying your opponent under what seemingly feel like endless waves of reinforcements. So Infernals are a heavily melee orientated army. They have some range attacks, but they definitely don't focus on being ranged heavy, and they tend to have sort of generally worse defensive stats than most other armies. And the horrors are slightly higher pointed than you'd expect. So a Tormentor, for example, their standard melee heavy is 12 points. It's only speed 5 with a 1 inch melee zone, and it has about 25 or 26 boxes of health. So they're stat-wise, they're not generally as hard-hitting or as resilient as your other heavies from other armies, but that's to account for the fact that they're going to get 3 extra heavies during the course of the game, and that kind of offsets that a little bit. So yeah, heavily magic-orientated, heavily melee-orientated. That's kind of Infernals in a nutshell.
So if I sit across from Infernals, don't take them at face value. Right, because that 100 points I'm looking at is not the army.
Right, they'll have a sideboard of horrors. They can be lights and heavies. They'll usually summon heavies for the best value, but what the army starts as, there's going to be 3 heavy horrors added to that could be different types.
It's limited, isn't it? The type of horror that you can summon in is limited by the points value that you're playing at.
Correct. So if you're playing at 100 points, it's 3. If you're playing at 75 points, it's 2, and 50 points, it's 1. And I presume you can summon more if you go over 100 points as well.
Now, Grimkin?
Yeah, absolutely. Grimkin, in terms of a resource mechanic, are a little bit more conventional. So instead of having their own essence mechanic like Infernals do, they use Fury. So they're a Fury faction with War Beasts. What makes Grimkin special is that they don't have any feats on their Warlocks at all. They instead have this brand new unique mechanic called Arcana, which in terms of the modern game intertwines with like a special use of command cards. And Arcana are exceptionally powerful command cards, effectively. So they'll give you all kinds of board-wide effects like -2 speed to your opposing models. They'll allow you to full-on cancel spells that your opponent casts. Now, in terms of Grimkin, how they've played up to now is that they have this kind of very heavy element of punishing decisions that you make. So you'll be sitting there opposite playing against Grimkin, deciding what to do. And sometimes if it feels like if you do a thing, they will go, pause, flip the clock to me. If you're playing in a tournament, I get to do a thing because you've triggered something in my army. They'll play a lot in your turn. So, oh, you've stepped too close. I've triggered an Arcana. You've got a -2 speed now. Oh, you shot something. Okay, my entire army has stealth at this point. It has that kind of feeling of you're meant to be doubting your own decision making as you play against Grimkin because of what might happen when you do certain things. So it's quite a heavy load upon not only what can I do against Grimkin, but what are they going to do in response when I do anything at all.
Yeah. Okay.
I actually remember, I'm going to tell the story of Sherwin at Nova. Sherwin was playing, I think you were playing, it's like just a Steamroller event at Nova, wasn't it? And I wandered past, and I always like to look at the clocks and see where we're at with it. And Sherwin's a very controlled player, very serene, never flaps, and never really seems to struggle on the clock. Whenever I play into him, he's that kind of player. And I look down, and Sherwin's down on like 15 minutes, and his opponent's on 52 minutes. And I'm like, what the hell's happened here? I said, what turn are you guys on? And Sherwin's like, this is the top of my 2. And
oh my
I'm
God.
Like, wow, what's happened here? And so I debriefed with him after, and he's like, every time I did something, I had to then rebuild my entire plan because the Grimkin player did a thing and I had to work out how to respond to it and what to do with it. And I was like, whoa, that's incredibly oppressive. If you don't know what Grimkin can do, they can really kind of gotcha.
It was a bit of it was a glorious culmination of factors, I think. So I was playing Spark Hammer way back when I was doing it before it was cool. And my idea of building Spark Hammer I've dropped him now. It's too good for me now.
Too good, too cool.
Yeah, but my idea of Spark Hammer is intensely thematic. Who knew that would be the case, right? So I have Spark Hammer. I have 5 units of the not Weather Vanes. I forget their name now, but the guys with the 3
Storm Vanes.
Storm Vanes. It's Storm Vanes. Okay, yeah. I got 3 units of Storm Vanes. I've got 4 Weather Stations. I've got 2 Borealis. I'm playing Storm Forge. You know, I'm not playing anything else. I'm playing Storm Forge. So, but of course, every time I hit something, I apply modifiers to my own guys, but my opponent is now also applying modifiers to my own guys. So every single dice roll is maths. So I roll a dice. Cool. So what's your def? It's this. Okay, I'm trying to hit you. So this is my mat, or this is my rat. Okay, cool. So I have these modifiers from my feet, and I have these modifiers from this ability, but you have these debuffs from this thing. And we're trying to pull out the calculator every time I roll the dice. And I'm like, okay, cool. Well, that unit's done. Great. We can move on to the next one. Oh, we can just start the process again and again and again. Wiped out more or less his entire army in the second turn, and then went, cool. I now have no time and end up clocking myself because there was nothing left to actually do anything. But super fun game. I loved it. But it was just a very good demonstration of what Matt's saying. It punished me for being a sinner.
Yeah, I can can relate to that. I've played Grimkin once in the wild within the last year. It was at Welsh Masters, and it was very easily my most difficult game because of what you talk about. And it's my job to know as much about the game mechanics of this game as humanly possible. And even I was stood staring at the table, being like, "Okay, what can I do here?" Down on clock, and ended up going in for a last-ditch assassination on the Wanderer that thankfully came off. And as I was going for that last-ditch assassination, trying not to trip on any of the remaining traps that he had set for me, with the Grimkin player, Rich Loxon was stood behind me, only a few feet behind me, just talking a little bit too loud. It was distracting me, and I was that focused. I'd completely thrown all pretense of like niceness out the window. Just turned around and just went, "You're loud," and then just went back to the game. And he just backed up from the table in horror. And I apologized to him later on for doing that, but I was just like, I was too like, I need to think about how this is going to work. Yeah. Anyway, so Grimkin.
Yeah. So very, very interesting mechanic. And you're right. So I've only ever once played against Grimkin. And he's sitting down going, okay, well, if you do this, I have a card. If you do this, I have a card. If you do this, I have a card. And I'm kind of thinking like, okay, I don't know what any of your models do. And now I'm trying to factor in the cards. I need to get better about learning the models, especially now that they're being printed. I need to spend some time with stats and I need to understand that stuff. And that's part of what I'm going to be doing here soon, preparing for, say, Adepticon. But it's...
Well, I don't know how much detail we want to go into at this stage, but with all of these new factions, or they're not new factions, but these factions that we bring into the new channel, they're all getting a quality of life review. And certainly, the way that Grimkin currently are is actually really oppressive. I mean, if someone whose day job is to know everything about Warmachine struggles to go into them, what hope is there for someone who's new to the game or returned to the game after a bit of a hiatus? There's definitely some degree of re-engineering that we've got to do to maintain that play style and that feel of the army, because it is really fun and different. But also make sure that it's a lot more opponent friendly as well as you friendly. Right. A good gameplay mechanic is rewarding for both players, whereas Grimkin can be a little bit kind of one directional.
Yeah. Well, it's good to know that obviously SFG has inherited Warmachine, acquired Warmachine. And I'm glad to see that you guys are taking a look at some of the pre-existing stuff and how can you put your design spin on it and really kind of streamline some stuff. And so I really appreciate that. Sherwin, how about the lore? I mean, so you're now the present lore master, not the forever lore master. And so I'm not asking for details, but I know you guys are working on story elements that you guys will be releasing for, I believe, Infernals and Grimkin and obviously other factions. So anything you can say there on the future of these factions?
So, I mean, I hope you're okay with this, but part of what we'll be offering to people as part of the new campaign is access to the old books for these the old Forces of books for these. So that's Oblivion, Grimkin, and obviously Convergence as well. So people will be able to read their backstory. They'll be able to read what the characters are, who the characters are, and so on. Especially the Grimkin book as well. That's a real treat. That's very different to everybody else's, all the other army books you might encounter. But in terms of going forward, that's still something we're talking about and discussing. With the Crucible Guard, the Thornfall, and then the Dark Operations, we thought very carefully about how do we approach those when we were making compendiums and making them to go have lore in the app, and whether we want to update that to get them up to Mark 4, and we made the decision we would do. These are three very unique armies, though, all of whom kind of come together in the Infernal Wars in the Infernal War in their own way, and as a result, kind of almost don't necessarily easily fit into or don't easily plug into the Mark 4 era. So this is a larger conversation for us to have. And when I say us, it's Matt and I to bounce off each other. We have these long car journeys to like Manchester where we get most of this conversation happening. Every so often we have to go out to HQ, and by the time we'll start off with one idea, by the time we get to the end, we've gone through about 17 other different ones, and we'll end up somewhere. But that's one for us to have a little bit further down the line in terms of how they fit in, I think.
Well, flip a question back on Ryan, which is how would you feel if the Grimkin and the Infernals, for example, were more of a historical release? So we're not necessarily bringing them into the current timeline, but we're actually saying, hey, this happened at a monumental part of the history of Iron Kingdoms, and we want to preserve that. And yet, but we still want to make sure that they're still playable in the current, effectively in the current timeline, breaking the rules of time, if you like. But what do you think of that?
Well, so help me better understand that. Infernals showed up. They showed up early because the Grimkin were involved. And current story, they have been beaten back, or are they still
Yeah,
wandering
effectively.
around?
No,
Yeah.
they've been back. So yeah, I'll give you an update. So they've been banished away. So the
Okay.
Infernals are back where they came from in their dimension, or yeah, in some way or another. One of them is somewhere completely in another whole dimension. We won't go into that, but that's a whole bunch of deep lore. Grimkin are much the same. They served their purpose to the old witch and got banished back to the void once more.
Okay. From that purpose, I mean, they're an important part of the story, and leaving them as a playable faction, I think makes sense. Just because there is a story that's moving alongside with the game doesn't mean that you have to be playing what exists right then. You know, Matt, when are you bringing back Haley too? I would love to
Right.
have her back. Maybe she's
it's on my to-do
turned to
list.
dust, but she's a historical figure.
Actually, Haley's one of the ones that's really easy because she disappeared at Henchhold into a time stasis, so she can come out pristine and not aged a day if we wanted to. So there's that as an option. Not in the current Frontier campaign, I hasten to add.
Hopefully she's softened some of her super OP time mage abilities while she's been in stasis.
No, she'll turn up with 2 Maelstroms, it'll be fine.
I'll leave that one to Jamie, though, because Haley was a lot. Okay, Sherwin, so with Grimkin and Infernals, we've talked about Convergence a number of times. Convergence came out when I was originally playing in 2016, and I know there was a fairly significant story arc with them. There was a lot of development through the faction while I was away. A lot of characters moved factions, ended up over on the Convergence side. So what have they been up to the last handful of years?
I mean, Convergence is so Sirius, the god, or the goddess, the Convergence worship is a new god to this setting. So, and that's what's quite interesting about all of these different factions we're talking about. Actually, is they all have a different source or a different origin than the actual established universe. You know, the Infernals, the Grimkin, Convergence, they all come from a different place, which is quite nice, actually. It's quite thematic. It fits in terms of what they've been doing. I mean, obviously, they were really around at the height of the Infernal Wars, or Infernal War, even, I should say. I keep making that. Apparently, I'm introducing new conflicts. Let's have them more. But no, so they actually, at the height of the Infernal War, is one of the ways that people are able to escape and preserve their souls away from the Infernals. There's this huge gate that at Henchhold that Matt mentioned earlier, where humans are just escaping through refugees and going into another universe. And that's the way of escaping from what the Infernals are when things look absolutely at their darkest hour. Now, obviously the Convergence are part of that massive fight there, and a lot of them fall. Some of them travel through the gate as well. Lucan, for example, goes through. Iron Mother goes through, and there's a few others as well. Axis falls in combat. And that's really, as a result of that, the Convergence, so the militant arm of the sort of Siriusist cults, ceases to be effectively in a meaningful sense in our timeline at that stage, because they're all effectively either through the gate on the other side or dispersed or dead. But that doesn't mean that the cults disappear. The cults actually are integrated into Signar and other places in society, because in the aftermath of the claiming, basically, especially Signar starts to be a lot more diverse, a lot more accepting of different belief systems. So rather than seeing these cults as a bad influence or seeing them as something where it's dissent against Morrow, actually they're embraced and they come in. The same with the Famorites, and they come into society, and that's where we get some cool stuff like the new Thunderhead, for example, which is very much based on a lot of Sirius's technology.
Okay.
So all of that stuff starts to get woven back in again. Now, it's not inconceivable that there are Convergence cults out there within the mountains and the secret places that they've always sort of really worked on and built. And, for example, some of the characters in the setting, Syntherian, Orion, they're still going. So absolutely, we can see more of what that is. But at the moment, they're kind of a bit like Circle. They're kind of just keeping quite chill at the moment. They've achieved a lot of their goals, so don't necessarily need to jump out into face what's currently happening with the Yorgoth.
Okay. So this is sort of a split Matt-Jamie question. Matt, if Convergence is a little bit more currently frozen in time, right? The models that we would see represented would represent what Convergence was. Obviously, Sherwin opens a door for maybe Convergence more stuff in the future. So if they are frozen in time, as you guys bring back Convergence, you talked about revisiting mechanics in some of these other armies. Is Convergence in the same boat that they're going to get a little bit of a revisit on their mechanics?
Yeah, they're absolutely. I think there's an element of Convergence not needing a huge amount. Their mechanic is certainly interesting, but it's not a huge barrier for entry. I think once you get it, you kind of get it, and you start understanding how the focus kind of moves around. So I think for me, one of the interesting things about Convergence was actually a visual silhouette issue. where you had a lot of models that actually looked very similar to each other, which makes it quite difficult to sift through at the tabletop. And a good example of that is there was a number of solo sort of servitors. I think there was like 3 or 4 different types, and they all subtly. It's a bit like the difference between the heads on the warjacks. I mean, do you know what each head on the warjack actually represents? No.
Only my own. Only my own.
Right. I just super glue the one that looks coolest and kind of go down that route. But I think what we've looked to do is say, hey, what are these servitors actually doing? Is there any actually validity in adding the complexity of having 4 different types, all looking the same but subtly different, and actually no? So we were able to streamline those down to reduce that kind of complexity load. So convergence is very much going to benefit from more of that kind of polishing, rather than, say, the Grimkin, where we are adjusting the timing steps on the Arcana cards, for example, to make them a little bit more counterplay effect, rather than just a gotcha. The convergence is a lot more just sort of streamlining and quality of life improvements. And of course, sticking Father Lucan on an 80mm base, of course. Let's just add that in. Yeah. Because I'm looking forward to painting Father Lucan on an 80mm base.
That'll be
Can't
cool.
wait.
Just to add to that, so that's also, I know Matt said it there in quite a good way, but so Father Lucan is someone who we all sort of felt spilled off his 50mm base a little bit, so he'll be getting a little bit of a scale increase, but only a small bit, because he was almost an 80mm caster on his own anyway. So a little bit of a scale increase, then going to an 80mm warcaster. That's the same version of Lucan. We're not doing like a second version of Lucan, so this is going to be a change to the existing version of Lucan. And then just to go into a little bit of detail there with the servitors that Matt was talking about. So those servitors still exist, but they're basically going to be a single type of servitor at this point forward. And you still have the servitors that come with other models. So the TEP, that would be the battle engine, still has its own unique servitors. The Prime Conflux still has its ionization servitors, and Iron Mother still has her servitors. I think they're called exponent servitors. But the solo servitors that you can purchase on their own are now all under one type that are called attunement servitors, and they have the highest points cost of the previous servitors, so it's 4 for 3, and they basically have almost all the different abilities of those other servitors previously. They can do a puncture shot, they can do a flare shot, and then they have the exploding mine melee attack that once you've used it, remove the model from play whether you hit or miss. So you can pay for those very flexible servitors to use now, but you only have one type to keep track of, unless they're coming with an attachment that's very specific.
Sure. Okay. Makes sense.
Just before we move on though, Ryan, like Jamie just has a really nice turn of phrase about the Grimkin changes, and I think that would be really interesting to hear him explain the tweaks that we've changed.
No problem.
To the Arcana card.
Yeah, no problem. So the Grimkin Arcana as we've sort of used the phrase "gotcha" a few times during this interview, and I think that is appropriate to describe how it feels to play against Grimkin a couple of times at the moment. I've done a thing, something has happened, and you couldn't necessarily have predicted it with accuracy, or now it's going to ruin your plans, and now you have to rethink your turn. And we don't think that's necessarily the most fun experience you could have playing against Grimkin in this instance. So we've adjusted the Arcana cards to work differently. And we also wanted to, when we did that, we wanted to have a good think about what does that feel like in terms of the Grimkin's theme. If there were meant to be a sort of this nightmare punishment mechanic beforehand, what does that feel like if we change the Arcana that are going to be a very core foundation of how Grimkin feel to play against? So we've redescribed how it feels to play against Grimkin. Instead of it being sort of a nightmare punishment mechanic, it's more of a sort of an inevitability of horror trope that you're going for instead. So you're going to have to fight through these abilities. They're going to happen. The Grimkin player has more control over when they work, but they basically have to declare them during their turn now. So take an example of one of them. I think it's Labyrinth, that at the moment is when you finish a movement, it triggers, and in your turn, I will say, okay, from now on, your models have -2 speed when they activate in my control area. How Labyrinth will instead work now, and this is the same template for most of the Grimkin Arcana cards, is during the Grimkin player's turn, I am using Labyrinth during my Warlock's activation. Now Labyrinth is in play. You know it's in play beforehand, but I've chosen to use it, and I don't have to wait for you to trigger it anymore. So now, when you activate in my control area, your models have -2 speed. So it's the same effect as before, but now the Grimkin player has controlled it. They can choose when it happens, and they put it up, and you now know it's in play, rather than wondering, is Labyrinth going to play this turn? I don't know, and I have to continue to play as if it might or it might not play. It is in play, but it's in play at a guaranteed time step.
I love that. I mean, again, right, going back to just being a Warmachine player and trying to look after all of these models and all of these rules, right? Because when you're playing on the table, you need to know what everything threats. Otherwise, you kind of get stuck in a bad spot. So if I think about Grimkin as they have 3 mini feats, right? It's declared on their turn during their Warlock's activation. that makes it a lot more palatable for me, I think, to think through.
And I think it's
Yep.
a bit like if you look at how the very best horror works, you know more about the more you know about something that's horrific, the more powerful that horror is. But you still want that
Right.
element of unknown. And I've heard Jamie describe this as creating that. This change creates that sensation of when you're stuck in a nightmare and
Oh,
you
yes.
know it's coming after you. You can't quite run fast enough to get away because you're in a
Yeah.
dream state. And that is that kind of feeling now that we've got with Grimkin, which I think is a wonderful way of describing it. And it is just a timing step shift. As Jamie says, it's the
Yeah.
same effect.
Yeah.
It's just a little bit fairer for
Yeah.
your opponent. It's a little
Yeah.
bit less cognitive load, but you still have that kind of existential kind of threat happening to you.
Definitely. There is one more clarification I'd like to add as well, which is that
Sure.
there's a tweak that all the Grimkin Warlocks have to them, which is they have an extra special rule on them that allows for you to play 2 command cards on them during a turn, because normally you're limited to 1 command card per model. Now, how Grimkin currently work is they usually can use 2 of their Arcana in the same turn. It's in your turn.
Yeah.
So to replicate that element, to allow that element of continuity for Grimkin, so they can still use 2 Arcana in the same turn. You can play 2 command cards on your Grimkin Warlock during their activation.
That makes a ton of sense. Sherwin, what I'm hearing is you just got 30 minutes back on your clock. How does that make you feel?
I mean, I'm not playing the faction anymore, mate. I'm just switching on now. Like, I need to find somebody else who's more, more edgelord than what Stormforge are, because I see them too much on the tables now. I think I might go Convergence in the next couple of months. I want a new pending project, so.
My secret goal is to equalize the player rates across every faction, because then Sherwin won't know where to go.
Right. That's our secret mission.
Nowhere to hide, Sherwin. I'm sorry. Sherwin, what is your color scheme Convergence? Because if you're excited to paint them, if you really love silver, you're good. But are we going to get a little flare?
I don't know if you can see that on camera.
Okay, so I'm sorry. It is lighter, but there's a lot of white in there, right? That is.
There's a whole bunch of white in there.
So it's okay.
So yeah, I kind of went with like a white scheme with obviously metallic parterre and so on, and then glue lightning coils. I'll very likely keep this, although I'll make them look a bit more beaten up and a little bit more rusty around the edges, because if I'm going to do them, I'll make them feel like they've been in tunnels for a very long time.
It's one of my favorite colors on models. It's just really, really hard to paint. Okay, so, with some design mechanics for Grimkin, definitely appreciate you guys sharing that. Anything else you guys want to share on mechanics, anything with Infernals or Convergence or anything?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that we've mentioned in terms of the redevelopment of these 3 armies coming in is that Infernals have generally had the lightest touch because they had the majority of their redevelopment done before the Jan update, so we just included it in the recent January update. So they're going to have the lightest touch kind of overall. They'll see some very minor tweaks to some of the existing models, but really not a lot. The main change for Infernals is going to be that we've mentioned the coming of the 4th Infernal Master, Vorgroth, Conduit of the Abyss. And that's going to be, adding a whole new leader to an army is going to make such a big impact. It gives you a whole new style of play. So things that we've mentioned already so far is that this Infernal Master's style is that they're a specialist in terms of summoning horrors. Now, every Infernal Master can summon 3 horrors to the table. Vorgroth is the specialist in that regard and does it better than anybody else. So firstly, just reading off a few things we've already said. So her feat allows you to have a 4th summon, and you can do it in the same turn as you're doing your regular summon. So she can summon 4 heavy horrors instead of 3, and you can double up on one of your turns. We've already mentioned as well that she has one of my favorite elements of Vorgroth is the name for the action she has called Alter the Deal, which takes a friendly non-soulless warrior model unit. So for example, your cultists, and you make them marked souls. So you suddenly have a lot more access to models you can turn into horrors because you need to replace a marked soul with a horror. So instead of having to use your expensive solos, Vorgroth can use her very cheap cultists to bring these horrors to the table.
Wow.
Okay, so those are things that we've already known. So what about something new? So there's another trait to Vorgroth, which is called Master Summoner. Horrors summoned by Vorgroth enter play with maximum essence. They don't just come into play with the regular 1 or 0, I think it might be, but they enter play with maximum essence. So you're much more essence efficient in terms of powering your horrors.
Yeah.
And then their spells list is very much battle group orientated as well. So if you think of this as a battle group Infernal Master, then you're going to have a good idea of where these spells are going to come from. So for example, mobility, just being able to give all of them +2 speed in Pathfinder every turn, all your horrors going much faster across the table, which is effectively a horror-specific version of Redline. So it's additional melee damage and speed, but take some damage at the end of the turn. So your horrors are going to be, you're going to have a lot of horrors, and they're going to move very fast.
Yeah. I just want to say that I'm very proud of myself because as soon as you said battle group related, the first spell that popped into my head was mobility. And
Oh, really?
I'm on the same page as the great Jamie Perkins, and that makes me feel good. I feel closer to the game right now. All right, guys, anything we missed? Anything else to share?
If you haven't had a look at the page for the Frontier campaign, Lost Stand and Salvation, please go and have a look at it. Give it a follow. If you can follow the page, then you actually get access to an alternate sculpt of Eilish, the character solo for Infernals. You'll get that STL that you can download and print out immediately just for following the campaign. Go and take a look. Check it out.
Okay. I will link all that in the notes on this posting, and so everybody will have easy access to that. Guys, I really appreciate the chat. Like I said, part of it for me and for so many players is we stepped away, midway through Mark III, and a lot of this stuff just got lost. And so you see it from afar and you just don't understand it. And then you go up to the table and the rules are all different. And it's a lot to take in at once. Sherwin, really appreciate you walking through the lore stuff. I mean, it gives me a great deal of comfort to say, yeah, this is all just the same world. This is all the same stuff. Absolutely love it. And then Jamie, thanks for some of the rules updates and everything. And Matt, we appreciate you overseeing continuity of everything. So, all right. Thanks, guys. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks so much.